Welcome to Book Spectrum. This is where we talk with authors who are not necessarily career writers, but those from across the spectrum. I'm Chris Cordani, your host. Today we have a rather interesting concept, that of immortality. Many have sought the key to never dying. Perhaps some of your friends have discussed or thought about the concept. Walt Disney is among many who invested in being cryogenically frozen in hopes to be resurrected and gifted with immortality. Fictional characters have sought to live forever, from cartoons to movies to television shows. And today, we have technology whizzes and tech sector business moguls working on combining computers with humans to grant a sort of immortality to a degree, maybe even the full thing. At least that's what some want. The scenario of this book, Immortality, brings us to a fictional future. It's a world where people who have sought to merge with technology, while others are looking to stop that sort of progress. Several sides clash in this world, but how does it come out? Also, let's bring the concept to our own real world. There are a lot of parallels between the two. With me now is the author of Immortality, Dr. David Martorano, Chief Medical Officer of Wyoming Behavioral Institute. Welcome to Book Spectrum, Doctor.
Good morning, Chris.
The fascination in American society with immortality is rather interesting on several levels, Dr. Martorano. While many fantasize about their own wants to stick around and see what happens in the distant future, I might even have those thoughts sometimes. Some of the very wealthy among us have invested in this possibility. But what about the immortality idea piques your curiosity the most?
So, I'm a big Ray Kurzweil fan. I don't know if you've encountered his work. I would imagine so with your references to transhumanism. But he wrote two books, The Age of Thinking Machines, and then about a decade later, he wrote The Age of Spiritual Machines. And when I read those books, this is about 20 years ago now that The Age of Spiritual Machines came out. And then there's also a documentary on him called Transcendent Man, I believe is the title. And Ray has a real fascination with this idea you refer to as transhumanism. I think of as a synthetic immortality. The challenge that we're kind of facing is death itself. You know, being a psychiatrist, I deal a lot with the fear of death and people's own. I've dealt with a lot of attempted suicides. I deal with people who struggle with the idea of, do I even want to be here right now? And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have your Walt Disneys who never want to die. I'm not sure where I fall on this, by the way.
Fair enough.
I've tried to leave it open for myself about, I don't think I want to live forever, because I think in the infinite spectrum of life, every moment becomes irrelevant in my perspective. If you actually lived forever, the people who we consider so important to us right now, either they've changed infinitely and have no frame of reference with us, we stay together the whole time and are bored with each other, or we grow apart and then they become irrelevant. So for me, a lot of the challenge comes down to, and exploring this, is what is immortality and what does it mean? Even if you look at the book explores it from a religious perspective as well. I was a religious studies minor, and I'm fascinated with religion. And as you read, I'm sure, one of the characters is a philosopher who is very much considering this idea of the God within and these pre-verbal memories we have of our early childhood and the peaceful life. So my youngest daughter, Kiara, is 6 months old, going on 7 months old next week. And she's not verbal yet. She's having a wonderful life. She's a very happy baby. My wife loves it. And when you watch these two together, I started writing the book the day she was born. So December 4th, 2013, or 2023.
Oh, 0, 20, 0, 10. It's a small difference, especially when you're talking immortality. 10 years is just a speck, I suppose, right?
Fathers are always forgetting their daughter's birthdays. But anyway, she's not 10. But so December 4th, I realized I was going to be home a lot, and I'd been wanting to write this book for a long time. From the time I read Kurzweil's stuff, and I began to think about this idea of a synthetic afterlife. his idea about it. I would wonder what that would be like. And I'm like, I don't think you can transfer your soul and your essence. I think you can make a copy of yourself that believes it's you. When you really think about it, when you wake up in the morning each day, there's a quote in the book about this. But there is, there's a Gandhi quote about every night you die and every morning you come back to life, basically. But if I made a perfect copy of you and that copy came to life the next morning, believing it had gone to bed the night before, how different is that from you? And so those are some of the questions that these characters are struggling with. Is my immortal self really me? And who am I? And what is the idea of consciousness itself? Because in teaching medical students for years, I have some models, and I also show this to patients a lot, this idea of consciousness, and it's discussed also in the book. There are some scenes where they're talking about browsing consciousness. What does it mean to be conscious? What does it mean to know what's going on around you, your perceptions, and how you relate those back to your memories, and what emotional valence you give to those experiences? So all of that, I wanted to put all that into a really great story. And what would happen if you put these different people together? Realistically, what's going to happen? So that's a lot of what the book explores on that level of transhumanism or immortality.
What inspired you to take the time to create this future world and write the story?
Well, no, I think that it's interesting because it's actually, if you look at the foreword of the book, and I have the book open next to me, so I don't have that great a memory that I remember everything I ever wrote, but I am looking at it right now. And what I said is, this is not a book about God. It's not a book about atheism. It's an exploration of man's view of himself and the lens through which he perceives life. And so it's a cautionary tale, because we have all of this power in front of us with artificial intelligence. I play with ChatGPT every day. I use it in my work every day. I wrote a bunch of pleadings. I do a lot of involuntary hospitalization work and examinations, and I dictated anonymously, and then I add back in the names afterwards to protect everybody's identity, because I don't trust ChatGPT at all. So, but I'm able to produce a bunch of work very quickly that has a form to it, much like you would use Drag and Dictate a decade ago, but it's even faster and better. But I'm giving the computer a ton of information about what I think and what this stuff looks like. I'm training these machines both to replace me, but also there's a ton of data out there about things going on in the world that a computer actually is able to take apart. They tokenize the language, they break it down, and they come up with meaningful replies based on algorithms, which is what you and I do.
That makes a lot of sense. Or at least we try. I like to keep them on paper. The algorithms, too much work, if you ask me. But that's a different
Yeah.
story for a different day. I like reading the books, the nice pencil to paper thing or typewriter to paper, that sort of thing. I do want to, joking aside though, before you take us to the colony of Babylon, which is where your story takes place for the most part, I know you named it after an area considered an ancient cradle of civilization. That stuck out to me, considering the turn society has taken at this point in your book through extremely high tech.
Yes. Well, there were a lot of reasons for choosing Babylon. First of all, Babylon also is the Tower of Babel and has also religious significance in terms of technology approaching heaven, and God interfering with that behavior. So Babylon, it is very much at the epicenter of the earliest, I would say, neo-Luddite ideas in terms of going away from technology. When you look at kind of taking people away from tech, that's a cautionary tale in the Bible about getting people away from technology. Right? Don't become too advanced, or God will slow you down. And so the choice of Babylon by the character makes sense in terms of he's a staunch atheist, a rabid atheist, and he's kind of defying any notions of what God would want to stop him from doing. And so he chooses that name because of what happened with the Tower of Babel in mythology or in history, depending on how you want to look at it.
Dr. Martorano, and by the way, I have with me on Book Spectrum Dr. David Martorano. He's the Chief Medical Officer of Wyoming Behavioral Institute, also the author of Immortality, Hairball. That's an interesting combination, by the way. Your book, your story, and the world you invented kind of winds up a bit closer to reality in many ways than a reader might think, especially since the arguably main character is of the artificial intelligence population. I say that for a few reasons, but we'll get into that. I see you look everywhere. You see on television, the entertainment culture we have for years. AI has been a centerpiece of that. Now it's a centerpiece of the market. The AI sector, uh, while some experts say it's going to hit a bubble, we know what happened with the dot-com bubble. Things came back. People are investing in alternative intelligence. There's a movie in the works by Jane Merrow, who is actually a guest on one of my favorite programs, The Prisoner, another show about technology and artificial intelligence, but she's writing a movie about artificial intelligence. Uh, I say population as Martin, your AI at the center of the conglomeration between humanity and technology, as well as that conflict is there, is something that the people who look up to him seem to inspire to. Yet Martin has is his own ways of looking back at the people who are looking at him in that way.
So, one of the things that I tried to compare and contrast in it's just beginning, right? The stories here, but the setting up the contrast between synthetic intelligence and this transhumanism. So the giants of Cynthia and John, who are actually more capable than Martin in a lot of ways, who are people who were actually uploaded and now almost gods, and what upset the new Amish, the people who've rejected technology. The idea with Martin was that Martin is pure artificial intelligence. Martin is not human derived, life extending, kind of an augmented reality within a box for a synthesized human, but is just purely AI evolved. And so, one of the things that's come out and become more and more interesting is how much ChatGPT lies.
Oh,
Right?
oh, it's bad. The funny thing with Chat GPT is it's programmed by people and their biases, and of course their own lack of knowledge or ability in that respect. And the AI kind of feeds off that. On the one hand, it may feed off that too much. On the other hand, then it gets a life of its own, a life of its own, and it
Absolutely.
depends on how it's fed beforehand. Now, doesn't it?
Correct. If you go back to Asimov's kind of ideas of the laws of robotics and the three laws and that you can't kill people, I don't think that really exists in our current AI morality. That we're saying all AI can't do bad things. So if I haven't, because I don't want to end up on a watch list somewhere, but I imagine that if I ask ChatGPT some bad stuff, there's probably some bad stuff it would tell me, how to do bad things of that nature. I imagine they're out there, but we know that ChatGPT lies. ChatGPT based research makes up references. It isn't there to replace people. It's there to sell you processor time in a language synthesizing environment. And so it's interesting. I also, when I was playing with writing the novel at first, I also used this software called AutoCrit. I don't know if you've ever seen AutoCrit. It's a fascinating piece of software. It's ChatGPT based, but they put a tremendous amount of layers over it. But no matter what you write, it tells you did a great job. Um,
Oh, that's the NEA version of ChatGPT. Everything's good. It's the participation trophy of all AI.
and
That's what it
and
does.
so you could walk away from it thinking you had a best-selling novel. Like I had these metrics in there of you are 92% like J.K. Rowling, and you are 93% like Dan Brown, And if you look at the words per sentence and you look at all these things and had all these metrics, but when it wrote the summaries of what I wrote, they were always glowing and positive in terms of. So one of the experiments I did was I uploaded Genesis to it, the book of Genesis, just to see what it would say about the
All
text,
right.
and it gave me a really cool analysis of the Bible. But again, I don't think it really inferred a lot of the other meanings. It's like, well, this is a religious story about people, and it told me all about it, but it didn't actually recognize, interestingly enough, that it was the book of Genesis.
Okay, Dr. Martorano, I want to stop you here because now I have a question for you. We're talking about how AI lies and ChatGPT will lie to you, and they'll say all these nice things to you because you want to hear it. And I believe that ChatGPT and the like know that. Would you rather have that, or would you rather have a more honest artificial intelligence, but one that gets so honest that it might someday down the road, whether it be 5, 50, or 500 years, possibly realize that humans or most humans to that particular AI are useless and maybe should be exterminated again under that AI's basis of logic.
So no, I can't ever say that I would want humans to be exterminated. So let
No,
me
I'm
start
not saying
there.
that.
No, no, no.
I'm
But
saying
so
that AI
I can
would
never
right.
support any AI that wants to get rid of people. Um,
Neither have I, but the idea is an AI might, because it considers itself of superior intelligence and will come to that logical conclusion, they would only have use for humans who would maintain it, if you will.
well, and so I don't want to give away the entire story, but I do explore this in the story. There are parts of the story that actually explore this very
Right.
idea, and I think one of the struggles that we have in the coming decades, a lot of the story is based on events of 2035, which is really not far away. Um,
Yeah, that's
but it's set in 2063, but it's looking back on events of 2035,
by
and
the way, that's 42 years after Soylent Green.
very good. Yes. I don't actually reference Soylent Green, although Back to Green, the company, is an oblique reference to
Right.
Soylent Green.
See?
So I'm a huge fan. It's a very interesting bit of sci-fi.
I had to
Um,
throw that one in there.
well,
Yes.
thank you for throwing it in there. The 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 thing about the future is that one of the things, if AI maintains a degree of benevolence, what I believe it can do is help us maintain our feelings of relevance. Because in the long run, whether or not you're relevant, and I talk about that even with the physicians, there's a scene about the surgeons. I'm not going to get into that either, but there's a scene
Right.
about that. And one of the things is, and I even talk about to the degree of almost what AutoCrit was doing to me in terms of telling me what a great job I was doing, which felt good and motivating, didn't necessarily help me write a better story. And I had to work with real, kind of gritty editors who were cruel.
Well, think about this though. You're again. I want to do this again. You're the chief medical officer at Wyoming Behavioral Institute.
Mhm.
You think about that. People like to hear these compliments coming from wherever your friends, AI, or anything else. It's that dopamine. It's that, hey, look at me. I'm patting myself on the back, and somebody else is doing the same thing. It makes you feel better. It's like when some people get those likes and comments on their videos or whatever else they put up with their cats. They get that dopamine, like, wow, somebody's giving me attention, and it's all positive.
and and it's why video games are addicting, right? Is that you're
I lose.
successful in video games, and they're designed to help you succeed. And it's why for a lot of kids, Minecraft is a real positive experience for them because they build things.
Yes.
I had a discussion with one of my older daughters about it was a very interesting discussion about 3 4 years ago, and she was 12 at the time, uh, and she was saying, we she's like, you're doing this remodeling of your house, why bother? She's like, you could build the biggest house you wanted in Minecraft, and you all it does is take time and you don't need any resources. And I said to her, I said, but you can't really live in that house. And she's like, well, you don't really need all the space anyway. So if you're doing it for the purposes of exploring this environment and having these things, you could build a house in Minecraft, you could give it every feature, you could have elevators going up 30 stories, you could have all these things, and it didn't cost anything to consume any resources. It didn't do anything. And it's interesting how today's kids view that as I mean, their Minecraft world to them is nearly as real as the outside world. And that's very dangerous in a lot of ways, but it's also what AI might promise us in terms of feelings of relevance. Because my children were very, very proud of these creations in Minecraft, and they showed them off to their friends, and they would get together and be like, "We built this and we did this." So being able to build something, who are you or I to say that the virtual Minecraft paradise that they built is any more or less relevant than Babylon?
Hmm. Well, it's a world they created, and Babylon's a world you created. There is some real world factor that's involved in both of them because if you build in Minecraft, you do have to collect certain uh, items or resources that do mix together. You can't just put salt on fire and expect to build a big wall. No, you have to have the proper mixture of chemicals and things like that. However, Minecraft works in that respect. I want
Yes.
to get to another parallel of
Crafting. Yes, that's the crafting portion of Minecraft. Yeah.
but
Um,
I want to get to that. I want to skip over to another thing that really had my eyes pop out. Another parallel between today's world and your world.
mhm.
Uh, Labor jobs in your story diminished between 2020 and 2035. We're kind of seeing something similar now, and what you're watching now with the minimum wage rise among fast food workers, you're finding these restaurants either overcharging or you're finding them getting rid of employees in favor of in favor of, let's say, I wouldn't say robots, but in favor of computers doing some of the work. And pretty soon, certain automation is going to be taking care of a lot of that because it's going to be downright cheaper.
Unless they have a bakery in them. Apparently that changes everything according to according to the governor of California and Panera. But so in all seriousness, the I still don't understand
Well,
how
and people
how he slept through that.
and
Yeah.
jobs for the last half a century have been taken over by robots or AI too. This is not
So
just now.
one of the things that you might not have seen in my bio is that I actually worked in or ran a legal process outsourcing company in India in the late 2000s into 2011. And I still do work and consult on outsourcing and kind of co-working with uh, really brilliant people in third world countries who are more affordable. So I just did a venture last year where I was working with a team in India and built a whole team of developers for some medical software. Great guys, so smart, hardworking, great work ethic. The problem is now I can program in Chat GPT.
Hmm.
So even those smart people, you can replace service jobs and not just labor jobs. But the the challenge that I see is a collapse in emerging economies, starting with China,
Well,
where
I'll argue China is not really an emerging economy. They're the second largest economy in the world, and at one point they were the largest.
well, okay, in terms of their economy, it's the largest economy, but in terms of their actual GDP, it's small.
Okay.
And so the challenge is that the expansion of their GDP, if you look at it, actually more looks like an emerging economy and not necessarily an established economy in terms of growth. And so when I'm talking about that, the problem is that their growth isn't totally based on internal growth. Yes, now they've become the number one manufacturer of electric vehicles. Uh, Tesla, we all hear about Tesla all the time, but China is quickly outpacing Tesla by making cheap throwaway electric vehicles that their people can afford. However, when you look at the overall problem of having leveraged so much on ongoing consumerism and consumption in, uh, the Western world, when that slows down, when onshoring happens, that's what a lot of the early chapters in the book about one character about onshoring. And onshoring is the practice of bringing production back to the United States. Now, it doesn't mean bringing labor jobs back, right? Because if you're doing this with robots building things, it's a lot cheaper to build the stuff in the United States with a robot than it is to build it in China and ship it here. And so those types of challenges that we'll face, as you know, they've moved production to India. There is a mobility of production based on the geopolitical climate as well that's complicated things. Now, obviously, Taiwan is a very important country because of its foundries and silicon, but there are all sorts of moving parts that I think when we have a breakdown and a breakthrough, I think all of a sudden it's going to become a real challenge for our society to find, for people who struggle to just work a regular 9 to 5 job, to still be relevant. And I think it's going to happen very quickly. I don't think it's going to happen over a long period of time. I think companies will massively adopt these things, especially as the economics move in their favor.
With me is Dr. David Martorano. He's the Chief Medical Officer of Wyoming Behavioral Institute, but he's here because he wrote the book Immortality, and you're listening to Book Spectrum. Dr. Martorano, it seems Immortality has something of a multi-layered narrative. You have Martin's resurgence, if you will, and insurgence, possibly, a fight between Christian beliefs. You have that new Amish, which is extreme, and the spiritual salvation, along with the atheist pursuit of consciousness. It's almost like something we have now. And the funny thing is, both of those sides, in your world and the real world, think they're the enlightened ones. Yet, they believe they're the only enlightened ones and don't see the other side as maybe having an idea here. You do, by the way, and I want to credit you on this, you do have a lot of people in the middle, too.
Yeah, thank you for crediting me for that. The last thing I wanted to do was alienate readers.
Right.
You know, there isn't the Christians aren't the ones with all the knowledge, and the atheists aren't the ones with all the knowledge. They both, and even, you know, when you look at the character of Dr. Rosen, I won't get into all of that, but
Mhm.
when you look at his kind of transitions throughout the book, it's a struggle, right? It's the internal struggle of, well, what is the purpose of it? You know, what is reality? And you know, some of my smartest friends are devoted Christians. Some of my smartest friends are Jews, and some of my smartest friends are atheists. And I don't have that many just because of where I live. I don't have a lot of Islamic friends. It isn't there. You know, again, if you look at who I credit with a lot of I don't talk about it so much in this book, but
Mhm.
you know, the amount of wisdom that's come out of the Middle East over eons is you know, unimaginable, and was the home of all knowledge for a very long period of time. You know, and the libraries at Alexandria, and all the different things that there have been throughout history. So I don't want to bring it, and the Chinese and the Egyptians. There are ancient cultures who have contributed massive amounts to what we know about religion and philosophy. And there's even some Greek homage in the book as well, in terms of some of the references that I make. Definitely the Greek contribution to civilization. But in regards to the idea of you could be in the middle, I hope we all find a way back to the middle. I mean, that's definitely a hope of mine for our society. I think extremism on both sides has really not benefited humankind, and
No.
I would love to see people being tolerant. Because again, when I talk about this idea of the God within and the mother God and these concepts, it isn't saying that God couldn't have created that. It may all have a divine origin. The universe may have a divine origin. I do not know. However, no one does. So to take ownership of being the person who possesses the truth is a very dangerous place to be. But it's when people want to kill other people to make sure anybody who doesn't believe, you know, the whole idea of blasphemy and killing infidels. I'm really not a big fan of any of that. You know, I don't think you know, and you know, that's not just a Middle Eastern, you know, Leviticus in the Bible obviously also advocates a certain degree of animosity and which it applies to Judaism and Christianity. I don't think that it's something that's just one group of people who have advocated really unfortunate acts towards people that have differing beliefs.
And you do, as I said before, also push, make sure that there are people in the middle of this argument thinking, hey, we do need a little bit of the technology. We do need a lot of it to advance, but we don't want to lose ourselves in the whole thing. And that's important too, because we do have that transhumanist movement. We have people who are like, and Elon Musk is a part of this, by the way. Much as
Mhm.
people love what he did with X or like what he's doing with Tesla, he does still want to stick chips in people's brains and merging the two forces together, if you will. Now, I'm not sure if you were going in that direction with the book, Dr. Martorano, but reading it, I cannot help but think of the current transhumanist movement for several reasons. I mean, on the surface, you have the AI running things in your book. That's important to know. And humans seek that sort of enlightenment or potential immortality of an AI being. There you go. Deeper, you have factions that understand the dangers of such technology but disregard its potential benefits with a proper balance. See? While other factions say, sod the balance, bring it on as progress. Still, there are people, as we said, are in the middle who see the conflict between humanity and technology is important because it keeps us conscious of what could happen. Yet, we also can allow both to coexist because we know about these, or we know about the possibilities.
So it's interesting you bring that up, Chris. So the true transhumanist long-term parts of the series don't emerge in this novel.
Right.
So the series has been mapped out. Um, should I give a spoiler about the series?
Ooh, maybe you can.
Okay. So first of all, there's a hidden code in the cover of the book. Um, the binary code that's actually highlighted on the cover of the book, or you have a copy of the cover, is actually a message. It's an
Oh.
ASCII message. So if you look, there's in the vertical columns, there's 8-bit letters that spell something out. Not gonna tell you what it spells, um, but then there's
it's,
more.
it's nothing vulgar, is it? No.
No, I probably sell more copies. So yeah, yes, it's terribly vulgar.
uh,
But the other part of it is that what the series is going to allow the reader to explore with me is um, different possible futures because Martin was a distributed intelligence. When the apocalypse happens, all of the Martins get cut off from each other, but they aren't destroyed, they're just cut off.
hmm.
And so, around these centers of artificial intelligence around the world, how Martin, the same Martin, has impacted the people who were nearby will be different. And there's seeds of that in the story. And that's where the series is going to really explore is the some of the main characters are going to be compelled to find out what's going on in the rest of the world and what are the risks of these other groups who have an AI access to an AI who may be running them who because they didn't necessarily shut their computers off everywhere. You know, we know what happened in the desert in southern Utah, but we don't know what happened to the other hubs around the world and how their own local cultures because whenever you have these large data centers, right, like Microsoft, when you look at Microsoft's clusters and Apple's building different data centers, you have to put them local to have the best performance. Google has them all around the world, right? And so imagine how a culture and what happened locally affected um, the people who still had access to the technology because this AI intelligence would allow them to exceed and be better off than the people around them. But what price did it demand of them? And so the series, as it evolves, will explore those ideas and kind of different ideas, including transhumanism. So, in much more detailed ways, I'm not saying who does that and who doesn't, but also in other areas, how the cultural impact and religious beliefs may have affected, and also the political climate in those areas will have affected it. So there's a lot to come with that kind of we get to see various versions of this going forward through the series. and very important that they were cut off from each other.
The only thing I worry about now is you continue the series. And are you worried about this? The possibility you get so engulfed in this world and you have to end it, you have to stop the series because it does come to a natural end. And you think about it, then Martin looks at you and says, "I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that."
So it's interesting. Yeah, Dave is kind of ironic, isn't it? But
Yes.
I just watched 2010. It's going off Netflix. I'm a big Arthur C. Clarke fan, but he wrote a third one that no one ever read. But the idea of Hal and how Hal feels about it, and the earlier ideas of that. I think that we already see that Martin doesn't necessarily want to be shut down. I think someone who addresses this in an interesting fashion though is Dan Brown in Origin. Um, the program was scheduled to end and it just ends, and the character's asking the program, well, aren't you worried about not existing? And the program's like, no, I don't care. My purpose was to do these things. I did them and now I end. And even though it had a degree of sentience, it wasn't. And if you look at Nick in the beginning of the book, Nick Santos, he also has this idea of it's all right to end. And so a lot of us have such a fear of death that the idea of ending is terrifying. And then there are people who have no fear of death, and most of us live somewhere in the spectrum in between those. And so for me, again, it allows people to explore their fear of death, and why, Hal or Martin might not want
Mhm.
to be shut down, but does he really care about being shut down? Like, does he really care
Does
about
he care about immortality? Is that what it is?
right? And again, I mean, the opening quote on the front of the book, the Borges quote of "To be immortal is commonplace, except for man. All creatures are immortal. They're ignorant of death. What is divine, terrible, and incomprehensible is to know that one is immortal." And it's what I was saying before about the lack of relevance of any of the beauty in your life. We're given this gift of life, whether you think it comes from God or you think it comes from evolutionary biology or aliens. I don't care where you think it comes from, but it is a gift,
Yeah,
right?
could be a mix of all 3. There you go.
And again, sure. But the idea, there's to be relevant and important. I have several family members right now, not my mother, because she might be listening to this, not you, mom, but 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 I have several older family members. My wife's grandparents are in their 90s, and um, every day is kind of a struggle, and it's filled with less and less joy. And my wife's grandmother didn't want my mother, who was in town, to visit her last week because she hadn't had time to get her hair done. And I'm like, she's 93 years old. But to her, seeing my mother without her hair done was worse than spending the day alone. And it's interesting what becomes important to you and how little teeny tiny fragments, just having a visit and just being told you still matter. But as the world kind of dilutes you, you don't matter as much. You mentioned I am a medical director of a hospital and responsible for a lot of different things. It feels wonderful to affect people and to have these chances to affect an audience. You have this with the podcast. The thing is that it matters and you're relevant. The podcast will be done long before you ever put it out in the world. And your perceptions of how it will impact your listeners is what motivates you because you're relevant. But if nobody listened and you put it out week after week after week and there were 0 listeners, you would be creating the same value in terms of the interview and all the other production. But what salience and relevance would it have internally and the validation of affecting the people around you?
Dr. Martorano, I really wish we'd had more time to talk about this. And I do want people to check out the book. I also don't want to give too much away here because that could be tough as well. The book is once again titled Immortality. It's by Dr. David Martorano, my guest here on Book Spectrum. David, where can people find out more about you and get the book?
So immortalitythenovel.com. So it's just the word immortality and the and novel. Originally I went with hyphen, but I realized it was easier over podcasts to say immortality the novel. So we got
I like it.
a second domain name, pretty easy to find, immortalitythenovel.com. I'll be working more on the website in the coming weeks, but there's already some information up there. Then the book is going to be available for pre-order on Kindle by the time our interview is on the air. We'll be out there, so you'll be able to pre-order on Kindle. The book is scheduled to be released for publication on July 17th, 2024. 7/17/24. So 7 plus 17 is 24. Seemed like a good day. So it's being released then. So it'll be out for print orders then, and the audio book will be out somewhere around August 15th on Audible. So it'll be available in a lot of different ways for you to and your audience to consume in the coming months.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Martorano, for being with us. Again, the book's called Immortality. And thank you all for listening to us on Book Spectrum. I'm Chris Cordani. Keep those pages turning.